Gumshoes? We are live with another Q&A. I have a funky piece of hair doing its own thing. All right. Change the settings. Can you let me know if you hear me? Okay, great. I confirmed it on my end. All right, welcome to another Murderous Heart live Q&A. We actually have some questions already queued up. We have some questions that I didn't get to last time, so I'll start with those. As always, if you have a question, it's best to put the word question or like a question emoji, but put question in all caps and then your question. If it's a really long question, I'm just not going to read it because some of them, they've just been so long and then they haven't been clear. So just ask your question. You don't have to do an infomercial. Anyway, okay. All right, let's see here. Let me pull up the questions. Okay, Charlotte asked how much money went back and forth on the day Al shot at Brandon. We don't know. All we know is that there was a transfer from Alex to, like, at one point in one of the police reports, it said a Hispanic female. And another point, it said the same female he was talking with at another juncture. Well, the only Hispanic female who was involved in this case was Zulma. So what I suspect is that someone made a payment to Zulma and that money was then transferred to Alex. And then when he shot, when he missed a shot, then he had to pay the money back to Zulma. They might have let him keep like a little bit for travel and his troubles, but certainly not the full amount. And so I suspect they were just thinking they would just throw Zulma under the bus along with Alex. Again, if my assumptions are correct, that this transfer really did go from Alex back to Zulma. Oh, okay. Nerf Fame asked, big puzzle left for me is how on earth law enforcement didn't know where Al was with 24/7 surveillance the day he supposedly went to Mexico. They must know where he really was. No? Yeah, I have that same question. I mean, either they exaggerated in their testimony and they didn't have him under 24/7 surveillance. They did say that they had cameras set up, pole cams in front of the houses for some of the key people, like Alex and Zulma, I believe Melanie Gibb, and most likely Melanie Pulaski. Well, yeah. But so they may have considered that 24/7 surveillance with Alex, but absolutely, like, if they were actually surveilling him, they would have known for sure if he went down to Mexico. So, yeah, that's a weird one. But also, what was the freaking point of 24/7 surveillance without picking him up? They even noted, I mentioned this in another live, but they noted on one of the evenings right before Alex woke up dead that they saw Alex and Zulma, like, I think going into his truck one evening and they were out for like an hour and a half. I'm like, what were you monitoring? I mean, they knew he was the shooter in Charles' murder. They knew Chandler police knew that both Alex and Lori lied. And a really significant lie was Alex said that Charles was standing for both shots. And they knew as soon as they moved Charles' body that Alex lied about that because the bullet grazed the floor and damaged the floor. So, I mean, like, on those grounds alone, they had probable cause to pick him up. Then he was a suspect in the attempted murder of Brandon Boudreaux. I mean, this was mid-December. Brandon was shot at in early October. Then he was a person of interest in the disappearance of the kids. It was most likely Ian who told law enforcement on December 5th that the person close to the suspects, which I believe was Melanie, said that the kids were dead. So, and then he was also potentially a person of interest in the attempted shooting of Tammy, as well as her actual death. So, I mean, so much suspicion surrounded this guy, and they're just like watching him and going, okay, all right, duly noted. He and Zulma went out for dinner or whatever and did nothing. So it's just absolutely baffling. I know some people say, well, I don't care about Alex dying. I do, because he could have been turned state's witness. He was upset, according to Zulma, that after he allegedly committed all of these crimes for Lori, they ghosted him. So that had to be, I mean, I don't need Zulema to tell me he was upset about that. I imagine, yeah, he was very upset. But, yeah, so I think he would have easily turned state's witness, because I think he would have known that they were throwing him under the bus. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. I love my puppies asked, where do you think Alex obtained the money he left to Zulema? He was not working. Zulema's excuse made no sense, and the police did not seem to question it. Yeah, the police didn't seem to question a lot of things, but I don't think that this money was from Alex at all. I've mentioned this in a few lives, but I suspect that this money came from Lori and Chad when they stopped through Phoenix on their way home. So they stopped in Phoenix. I believe they flew into the Phoenix airport and then flew out of Mesa like hours later to return to Rexburg. It was that or the other way around. And in between during that layover, they met up with Zulema. At first they were going to take her out to dinner, and then they were like, no, you know what, just come to our hotel room and we'll give you a blessing. But my question with that is, why would they be meeting up with Zulema? Like, they only have a few hours. They get a hotel room, and then they're like, that chick we keep ghosting because she texts both of us so much? Yeah, let's meet up with her. So that makes no sense to me. Why not Melanie or Colby? Why just Zulema, as far as we know? So I suspect that, my very strong suspicion is that the money didn't come from Alex. It came from Lori and Chad, and it was payment to off Alex. And I think she brought it up because she was afraid that they would find it and that could look suspicious. So she just cut them off at the pass. That's, again, just my opinion. The FOIA docs don't address it. They just seem to accept that, like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Your husband, I mean, like, they were married. Why wouldn't the money just be in the bank account and that would belong to her because they're married, you know? So I think at that point, Lori and Chad were very concerned about leaving a paper trail, and that's why they handed her cash. Yeah, my opinion. Okay, girl next door asks, did Alex get married before or after his blessing? He got married before, I believe. Let me double check. I'm pretty sure, but let me just double check. Because he got married over the Thanksgiving weekend. Let's see. Let me just double check. Oh gosh, I searched my timeline for blessing and there are too many references. Okay. Oh, no, it was before. So Chad gave him a blessing on November 24th, and I believe he got married on the 30th, I think it was. I think so. I think they got married the 29th or the 30th. Yeah, he got married the 29th. So Alex gave him the blessing 5 days before he got married. And I mentioned this in another live, but it was somewhat of an arranged marriage. Like, I remember Zulema. Let me see if I can find the reference. But yeah, Zulema asked Lori, like she clarified if she said what she thought she said. Let me see if I can find it. Yes. Okay. And I will drop a link to the screenshot in the chat. Okay. The Dropbox link isn't working, so I'll try a different way. You can let me know if that works. But let me see here. Oh, yeah. So this was in August 7th. Zulema asked, were you trying to tell me the other day that Alex is going to be my husband to finish my mission here? Then she followed up, I'm a little slow at times and I don't get hints. Lori said, yes. Did you get that answer? Lori followed up, it's what we saw in the future. So I believe at this point, they were already planning, like Alex was going to do all of the crimes, do whatever Lori needed, and then they would need Zulema to be married to him. Now, they might have believed like the only way he would get to heaven is if he was married. Oh, I dropped it in the wrong place. I dropped it in the moderator chat. Let's try this again. Oh, yes, I just saw in the chat. By the way, it is we have two birthdays today, two moderator birthdays. Julie and Janice both celebrate their birthdays today. So please join me in wishing them a very, very happy birthday. Okay. So Lori said, it's what we saw in the future. Zulema said, I had an impression when I met him for the first time, but I dismissed it quickly because he's ugly. No, because I really didn't want to have a man again in this life. It's weird, but it's the in this life that's weird. I'll ask in the temple tomorrow. Lori replied, okay, that's good. Always ask the Lord. Like, what is wrong with these people? He's the only one who knows what he has in store. Zulema, you always encourage me to do that. I love that about you. Lori, what time are you going to the temple tomorrow? So excuse me. She really wants her to get an answer quickly, but she knows that Zulema is such a sycophant. Of course, she's going to hear from the Lord that Lori and Chad are right. Anyway, early 7 a.m., then Zulema asked, does he know? Meaning, does Alex know? Yes, he knows. He knew before we told him what we saw. So they first talked to Alex and was like, oh, by the way, you're supposed to marry Zulema. And then they claimed that he was like, yeah, already knew that. I mean, I think he had just shared his phone number with her. It was sometime in August, not too long before he left for Rexburg. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, I don't know, but it was in August. And so, I mean, they did not know each other at all. Anyway, Zulema said, interesting, ... And then she asked again, he knew? The one that can't see anything. Think veil and all. I didn't, and I'm the one that can see things. So, the arrogance. Now, keep in mind, Lori had also told her that he was like a kindergartner in like the things of the spirit. So she had warned her 7 gatherers to be very careful what they said in front of Al, because he was like a kindergartner. And then, Lori had also originally said that he was a 1 probation kind of guy, like this was his first life. And then later, she and Chad just changed that up and said, oh, you know what? Actually, this is his 5th probation. Anyway, Zulema said, so in the past 2 days, I've had guys come to me at Starbucks while I'm working. This hasn't happened to me in like, I don't know how long. Roful. Lori, funny. When it rains, it pours. A little element humor for you. Haha. So, really, really bizarre stuff. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Did the Boudreaux family ever account for the dark daughter's blood being there? So this person, Marion, hi Marion, is referencing the blood in the Rogue. So the blood on the seat and the back seat and the floor. I'm not sure if they got DNA profiles from the blood on the floor because the car had been cleaned. Colby had it cleaned. But the blood on the seatbelt, so the police report described it as a large brown spot of blood on the rear passenger side seatbelt. Like, so not on the bottom, like on the top that goes across the torso. That's also most likely where Colby and Kelsey would have had Riley's car seat. Because they didn't have their younger daughter at that time, Ava, I think her name is. They only had Riley. So they would have seen this large blood stain on the seatbelt every time they, put their daughter in the car seat. Having said that, because it was up by I think they call it a carriage, like up in the top where the plastic part where it connects to the back of the seat, it was on like right by it. So that DNA ended up being the middle daughter's DNA. And I know it was the middle daughter because her name matched the redaction. And the middle daughter was one of the ones who had been declared dark. So Melanie's middle daughter and son were both declared dark. So that's the backstory on that. Also, while the spreadsheet link is incredibly detailed, oh yeah, I shared a link to just everything. Like when I went through the Gilbert police report, I tracked every reference to blood, DNA, and I tracked it against, like, when I found evidence IDs, I would have that in one spreadsheet and, other details. So it's like a multi-spreadsheet document, and that's how I tracked down, like, whose blood is whose, and, the DNA, and the way they matched some of these bloodstains to Tylee's DNA, Tylee's name fit in the redactions. And if someone has, I can share a link to that spreadsheet if I can find it really quickly. I did share it in the other one, but let me see. I think it's in my analytics account now. Put my glasses back on. Okay, yeah, it's called a DNA tracker, and it's from the Gilbert police report. Most of you are going to open it up and be like, what is this monstrosity, and never open it again. It's a lot of data, but this was, like, basically when you have information that's in like PDFs, that's called unstructured data. So there's not a lot of analysis you can do on unstructured data outside of like some machine learning algorithms. Won't go into that. But so in order to organize it, I structure it, which just means I put it in like a spreadsheet format. So anyway, so I shared that just for like the people who are like, that wasn't Tylee's DNA in the rogue. I mean, it's so the way that they got this is they found a bag of clothing, and this was in Lori's apartment. It was in like a duffel bag, and there were 2 pair of underwear that had multiple, all of this evidence had multiple DNA sources, because if you even touch something, you will transfer your DNA. But each piece of evidence had like a primary DNA profile, and the primary DNA profile on both pairs of underwear, the name, like Tylee's name, fit in those redactions. So what I suspect is Tylee went on like a weekend outing, maybe when she was in Arizona, or maybe she worked out. Anyway, there were 2 pair of probably underwear that had been worn since they had DNA, and they were able to use that. So, what was it? Well, one of the police departments, it was actually the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, sent that bag to Arizona to have the DNA tested because they were just distributing the workload. And then they compared the DNA to the blood on, like, that was throughout the Rogue, as well as there was blood in the front passenger's seat of Alex's truck. I think his truck only had 2 seats, but anyway, and the name, and it said that the DNA in the in the blood stains in the Rogue and the truck matched the DNA of the underwear that were in the bag. But then there was a separate DNA spot from a large blood stain, and that matched the Boudreaux girls. The middle Boudreaux girls' DNA. So, having said all of that, oh yeah, this is a multiple part question. Yeah, she mentioned that someone from my family had been on the Manhattan Project. That was my maternal grandfather. He was a physicist on the Manhattan Project. And I actually found a list of the physicists who were on the project and found his name. Because with my family, I wasn't sure whether to believe that claim. Joe, as well as Tom, they never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So there were some claims that they would make. Now, Tom was much, much worse than Joe. But so basically anything that my brother Tom said, I mean, he really came up with some bizarre stories. Even our like foster care origin story, I mean, it was absolutely bizarre, completely outside the realm of possibility. But Joe had told me that our grandfather was a physicist on the Manhattan Project. And so with the movie Oppenheimer, I guess this information kind of floated to the surface. And so I actually found my grandfather's name. So I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good to know. Okay. I think that was it. All right. Let me see. Had Lori mentioned anything regarding Stacey while you knew her? Okay. I feel so bad for Stacey if it is true that she was left alone in hospice without the Cox family visiting her. So I only remember Lori referencing Stacey one time. I think it was the second time I had gotten together with her, like our first family vacation. She told me that her sister Stacey had died, and I noted it was one of only 2 times I ever remember her like tearing up when she told me about something. The second time was when she talked about her second husband, the abuse from her second husband. She teared up when talking about that. But she teared up when talking about Stacey. And I don't even remember what she told me was her cause of death. She was just pretty emotional when she talked about that death. But Janice's brother was in hospice at the same time, or he was visiting, I think, another family member in hospice, and had reached out. He told, oh gosh, let me see. He told Stacey's ex-husband, Steve, that he had tried to get a hold, or he got a hold of Janice, and he was trying to get them to come and visit Stacey, because he's like, she's in hospice. She's not going to make it much longer. Are you guys going to come and visit her? And according to Steve Cope, he said that Janice had told him, we're trying to get back, but apparently they didn't come back before Stacey died. And one really sad detail in all of this is Steve brought Melanie to visit her mom before she died, when she was in hospice. And he said that Melanie had written her a letter and put it in her hand, and then they left, and that was the last time Melanie saw her mom. So that was a really sad detail. And then I didn't watch this live, but I've heard from multiple people that Megan, who was Lori's cousin, or is Lori's cousin, said that Alex had reached out to her, and I guess he said like he was worried about Stacey and wanted her to go with him to check on her, and found her unresponsive, and then took her to the hospital, which is where she was put in hospice. So Megan feels like Alex was using her as an alibi, which would track with this family. And if so, what an absolutely horrific thing to do. Okay, Rhonda Gaines asked, is Melanie Pulaski allowed to see her children? Yes, she has shared custody with her children, last I heard. And she and Ian are living in Arizona, in the Phoenix area. And one thing that was interesting with that was, I think, Ian sent his ex-wife, Natalie Pulaski, a text or an email saying that Chad wanted them to move to Ammon, Idaho, which is like 30 minutes from Rexburg. And Ian at the time was like, as if I'm going to do that. Like, he wouldn't even consider that because I was too far away. And I guess he also thought it wasn't justifiable, like it didn't make sense. But then he moved to Arizona, where, who knows how often he sees his kids. One source told me he doesn't see his kids very often. But that would also kind of make sense with him living so far away. But yeah, so that's strange. I guess they figured, I don't know, they thought they had a better chance with her kids, like living close to her kids, because she still had shared custody, which is absolutely bizarre to me. But I think Brandon has Gilbert police to blame for that, since they didn't pursue prosecution. Without pursuing prosecution, the grounds for like terminating her parental rights or only granting supervised visitation would have been shaky. But like when Joe was attacked by Alex, like it was like 10 days later or something, Lori moved to have his parental rights terminated. Like, just try to imagine the moxie that took. Like, he had just been, assaulted, and, there was this plan to murder him, and he was hospitalized, and Lori still went on the offense to have his parental rights terminated. And so they compromised at only granting him supervised visitation. So, yeah. So, go figure. Okay. Aunt Clara asked, if you had to guess, how much money did Lori and her band take in during their murder spree? Not as much as they had hoped for, that's for sure, because yes, she didn't get anything from Charles' death. She got 63,000 from Joe's death, which a bizarre detail that emerged from Lori's trial, because during the time that I was there and, obviously following the trial, they mentioned that her payout, she received that payout on October 26th. And I was like, October 26th of 2018, that just happened to be the day that Lori and Chad met. So when they met, Lori was able to say, oh, by the way, I have this money. And so that like financed the beginning of their murder spree. Another really sad point of irony is, according to a confidential source, of a very trusted confidential source who was very close to Charles and Lori, but more so Charles. Charles had reached out to this person who worked in insurance and annuities to ask if this person could help with the insurance payout from Joe's death. Well, Joe was found in April. He was found April 3rd. At that point, this person thought that Charles had reached out around October. And this person did reach out to the insurance company, and they did receive the payout shortly thereafter. And they thought that the payout was October or November. And it was October. We found out at the trial it's October 26th. So in a very sad and tragic twist of irony, Charles helped get the money that was then used to justify his murder, and so, because with Lori having this money, I'm sure that made her all the more attractive to Chad, and she was able to start traveling all over the place to all of these different conferences and meetups to be with Chad. So anyway, yeah, so that was 63,000. At one point, Kay had emailed Detective Moffat and said she knew that Lori wanted to offer her JJ in exchange for money. So I don't know if she had actually said something, intimated that she wanted to exchange JJ for money, but Kay had just said that would be stupid on her part. So outside of that, they didn't have money coming in except for the Social Security from, following Charles' murder. So she received Social Security payments for JJ, I think. Yeah, JJ because his father was dead, and then herself because she was the spouse. And then when each of the kids were murdered, she then received, I don't know if she received, no. So she continued to receive the Social Security for JJ, and then she had taken over the Social Security payments for Tylee because of Joe's death right before Tylee's murder. So, but those payments, like the Social Security for Charles and JJ, were, I think, $1,900 each. And the Social Security for Tylee was, I forget, it was around that same amount. So not a lot. I mean, it really wasn't until they murdered Tammy, and that's when they really got the windfall of the 430,000. Okay. Okay, Sanga, hey, asked, are you angry with law enforcement? There has been a lot of missed opportunities to prevent some of the deaths. Yeah. I mean, there were so many people who could have prevented some of these deaths. I'm not aware of anyone who could have prevented Joe's death, but with Lori running off to Hawaii and reportedly bragging to two different friends, and then those friends, one, I forget now who, one was April Raymond, and I forget who the other one was, but April apparently had told Ann Eliason that, or the other friend had told Ann Eliason, who also lived in Hawaii, that Lori paid her brother to murder Joe, and then when Ann said something to April, April said, oh yeah, she told me that too. So if any of the people who knew that Lori claimed to have paid her brother to murder her ex-husband had reached out to law enforcement, there could have been an investigation into his death that could have prevented multiple murders. And then when Lori was threatening Charles, she flew out to Hawaii, stayed with April. April said that Lori told her that she expected to get a call any day that Charles was dead. So a call to Charles or law enforcement, because at this point now you have the people in Hawaii, they knew that she also said that she paid Alex to murder Joe. And now here, her fourth husband, she's expecting a call any day that he's dead, and no one reached out to law enforcement. So any of those people could have saved Charles' death and everyone who died after him. And then after Charles was killed, all of those people who knew about her threat to the claim that she paid Alex to murder Joe, and then knew that she was predicting Charles' death and, had this whole plan, if any of them had come forward and said, you know what, I think that this woman is just murdering her exes, and estranged husbands, that could have saved the kids, and so certainly once Chandler got involved, that's when it's like, okay, now Chandler has blood on their hands, because their investigation into Charles' murder was an absolute sham. And back in 2020, I think it was, I did a very long live about, just the joke of an investigation into Charles' murder. And that was just from the information we had in 2020, or it might have been 2021. No, I think it was 2020. But anyway, it was early in the case, and more information has come out since then. But so Chandler, even the fact that when they were waiting, okay, so it appears that Lori and Tylee went to Alex's place because I did a whole live on what the GPS data tells us from the day of Charles' shooting. And so her GPS, and it was actually Charles' phone, was pinging everywhere because she turned off GPS tracking on her phone, but she had taken Charles' phone, and Charles' phone was pinging everywhere she went. So Charles' phone was the one that left the breadcrumbs, for where every place she went. Well, one of the places I identified as Alex's house. He was renting a house, and that I was able to verify because I found the address in the FOIA docs. So they were hanging out at Alex's house when Detective Yinklin, the female detective, reached out to them and asked them to come back to the house to walk them through like the events of the shooting, because at that point now they were suspicious, because when they moved Charles' body, they saw that the floor was scored where the bullet hit, and that could have only happened if Charles had already been down. So they're hanging out at Alex's. Well, then his phone pings in this, like when I looked up the GPS coordinates, it was like a medical plaza, and it was being built out, and there were multiple dumpsters. So what I suspect is they were like cleaning out Alex's house and threw a bunch of stuff in one of those dumpsters. And then someone after that live told me, oh, Summer's husband's office, he's a chiropractor, his office is in that medical plaza. So I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. So then from there, then they go back to the house where they interview Alex again and have him draw out like the room and how things went down. And they also wanted to interview Lori, but Lori was like, oh, I have to pick up JJ. And they're like, oh, okay. And that was it. Like, they never brought her back to the house. They released the house, and they never did, like, search Alex's house, and they never had another interview. I think they may have called one of them once. But Detective Yinklin noted on Dateline, like, they never followed up with us, as if yeah, criminals aren't really inclined to follow up with law enforcement. Like, I'm sure that at that point they were probably at peak paranoia, thinking they're going to do this whole investigation. And I think that's the whole reason for the pool party that night. The infamous pool party, because I think they just wanted to, compromise the crime scene in the event that they came back to do more analysis, but they didn't. So certainly, in my opinion, Chandler Police has, they have I'll just say, the shared culpability in the murder of the kids, Tammy, Alex, I believe Alex was murdered, and quite possibly Eldon Clausen, who was Chad's neighbor, who apparently, as the story goes, he and Chad went out to eat after the week that Eldon died, but that was also the week that JJ was murdered and buried. So anyway, so then that's, Chandler Police. Well, then Gilbert Police gets involved when Brandon was shot at. And they did a much more like exhaustive investigation than Chandler did. Like, they actually, talked to neighbors. Like, the one neighbor who walked up from Chandler, the day of the shooting, detective stopped him, was like, who are you? Yeah. And then, when he identified himself and apparently said like he had some kind of information, he was like, no, like just shooed him away. And there wasn't a single reference in the entire Chandler police report to an interview with anyone from the neighborhood, like not even the next door neighbors, to ask something like, oh, we have multiple gunshots in an unfurnished room with wood floors, and it was surrounded by either glass or mirrors, and was a high power, I believe a pistol, but a very high power pistol. And I talked about in one of the lives, I tracked down the decibel rating of that pistol, and it was the equivalent of like a jet engine taking off. So very, very loud, and certainly like someone would have heard that. And if they didn't, if a next door neighbor didn't, then the question would be, was a suppressor used? What some people call a silencer. But anyway, so at least Gilbert police like talked to neighbors, and like one neighbor was out walking their dog and saw Alex sitting, or a man who fit Alex's description, sitting in the Jeep before Brandon got back and stuff. So they did a pretty exhaustive investigation of like the neighborhood. They canvassed the neighborhood, but then they had one interview with Melanie Pawlowski, or then at that time Boudreaux, and allowed her to bring her toddler. So of course they couldn't talk about things that you couldn't talk about in front of a little walkie-talkie, and they never made her come back or anything. I think they reached out with like one phone call to clarify some detail, I think, but they never investigated her, and so I think then they also at that point shared in the culpability. But certainly then all of the friends who knew the plan to murder the children, allegedly Melanie, we don't know what Summer knew, but a lot of people who could have stopped this. But yeah, also law enforcement. Karen Erickson, hey Karen, asked, has anyone gotten whatever FOIA Idaho is going to release? So to my knowledge, they haven't released any FOIA docs yet. For those who don't know, FOIA is an acronym for Freedom of Information Act. So citizens and reporters, producers, they can request these documents. You have to pay for them. But yeah, so I haven't heard anything about FOIA docs being released yet, but they have to go through and redact, and I'm sure they're going to be very careful with those redactions. But yeah, so I don't know how long that will take. Okay, calling. Oh, Amanda said calling the Smalls walkie-talkies from now on. Okay, Friday Tie Day. That's a great name. Did you ever meet Alex? If so, what were your vibes about him, or what was said about him? So, okay, no, I never met Alex. But I think at the time that I was, like visiting with Lori, that may have been the time where he was estranged from the family, like after he had been excommunicated. So he was pretty much estranged for a period of years. And I thought it was interesting how even when he wrote like a postcard to his friend, I think her name was Mary Elizabeth, he asked her to get something from his mom and referred to her as Janice. So it may mean nothing, or it could also mean that he was referring to his parents by their first names because they disowned him. So, but no, I never met him. There was one time, and I don't think I've ever shared this, because it was just such a strange detail. But I had a stalker at the time that during one of the times I was hanging out with Lori, and I just mentioned it because like at that point it had become pretty intrusive, and the person had like a criminal history and stuff. Anyway, so I think I don't remember the reference because I'm like really private with details like that. But there might have been something that happened that triggered me telling her about that. I don't remember, but I remember her telling me, well, and this was just so bizarre because she said, well, if you need him taken care of, I know someone. And at the time, I was just like, who does this wealthy white woman from the burbs know that would like take out a stalker? And also I dismissed it because I was like, no, like the police are involved, and I got an injunction against this person, and the person was I didn't even request this, excuse me, because usually this wasn't granted on the first attempt, but the judge of his own volition was so offended by this person and some of the bizarre things they said in this court hearing. He actually added that the person was barred from ever carrying a firearm again. But anyway, so that's the background. I had this stalker, and Lori was like, if it gets too bad, I know someone. And of course, I completely dismissed it, laughed it off, like, oh, okay, yeah. But and that obviously anyway, but now I look back on that, and like there was one point, it was pretty far into the case, I thought back to that because I had completely forgotten about it and was like, oh my gosh, was she offering Alex's services? Because now, knowing that Joe was attacked the week after this vacation we had, I just wonder if like that was Lori's attempt to get my hands dirty so that like if Joe went missing, I wouldn't say anything. But anyway, it was an interesting insight. Of course, I didn't take the bait and wasn't even tempted. Like I just thought that was absolutely bizarre. But so, but yeah, other than that, I remember Adam talking about their brother being really funny. And but yeah, I'm sure she mentioned him, but I never met him. Okay, and Charlotte asked, do I remember correctly or not? Did Chad talk to Alex on the day he died? Refresh my memory. Yes, he did. So, yeah, I think Chad gave him a blessing, but I wonder if that in that phone call, Chad and Lori encouraged him not to call 911. I wonder if they just made him paranoid, like you can't call 911 because you're going to be arrested and, blah, 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 blah. They already had like such a mistrust of the police, but Yeah, I wonder if that was the primary purpose for the call. But yeah, I do not believe that Alex committed suicide. I will never believe. I just won't. It's just not. First of all, it like poison isn't. That's really not like a male modus operandi. That is a uniquely female, like murder weapon du jour. Men tend to use firearms or something a little more violent, but to give himself, like to take poison and die such a, like a horrific death. I just don't see him doing that. I think he was pushed. Okay, Janet asked, are there any clues as to what triggered the change in attitude toward Alex from idiot to useful idiot? So I think originally they just didn't want, Lori didn't want her friends to talk to Alex because he was the family weirdo. Zach Cox talked about that in his interview with Justin Lum. And Colby also said something to that effect in his interview with Gilbert Police. Like he referred to him as a bum and nasty and weird, I think. Definitely a bum and nasty. But I think he also said something about him being weird. Another detail that he added was that Alex and his mom started hanging out again in January 2018. So that was pretty convenient timing, given the fact that Joe died in March. So this is a solid Lori pattern. Like, okay, you're useful to me, so I'm going to bring you back into my good graces. But so I think originally, Lori wanted Alex involved enough to kind of stoke the flames of these beliefs. Because according to Janice Cox, they started listening to these podcasts, these Julie Rowe podcasts, when Lori moved back to Arizona from Hawaii. So that was I believe late 2017. And then even in Lori's weird Hallelujah song, she started it off with it started off with Julie Rowe, and I mean it's just this, she talks about how these Julie Rowe podcasts lit this fire in Alex's heart. So I think she needed him around long enough to keep manipulating him about these weird beliefs, but didn't want her friends to take too much credence in what he said. So she described him as being a kindergartner. As I mentioned before, he was a one probation kind of, only a first creation. So I found it in my timeline. According to Zulema, sometime in February, a couple weeks after Lori and Melanie Gibb told her Charles was a zombie. So Lori and Melanie Gibb told Zulema that Charles was a zombie. And then a couple weeks later, Lori said, this according to Zulema, Lori said to be careful what they said around Alex because he was a, quote, only a first creation, and compared him to a kindergartner trying to absorb doctorate information. Oh yeah, this group definitely taught doctorate level information. I'll drop a link to that screenshot. So that was early on, but then I think eventually they realized, you know what, we don't want to get our hands dirty, and we cannot have Alex around, because after he commits all of these murders, he's going to be a liability. And yeah, so I think that's when the plan was hatched for Zulema to marry Alex. So that was, circa August. So right before she moved to Idaho. Really strange stuff. Okay. Oh, but let me finish that thought. So it would make sense that they would revise their understanding of Alex and promote him to, I think it was like his fourth or fifth probation, because they now had to kind of sweeten the deal so that Zulema wouldn't be like, why would I marry a first creation when you said I'm a fifth creation? So they just made stuff up as they went along. And I personally think that everyone knew that this was all made up, except for maybe Alex. But I also suspect Lori had something on Alex, and that was also a motivator. Okay. MM Clark asked, do you think Tylee was already gone by the time she was left at Chad's? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because Alex's phone was at Lori's apartment, in my opinion, for too long for them to murder Tylee at Chad's. So his phone pinged at Lori's apartment. I'm really surprised they didn't tell him to turn his location tracking off, but I suspect no, I'm not surprised. I suspect they wanted him to go down for all of these murders. So his phone first pinged at her apartment at 2:42, and then he didn't leave until 3:37. I mean, this is the middle of the night. I don't think that they were just like hanging out playing parcheesi, So I think that gives us a pretty good window of when Tylee was murdered. Plus, also, it just would have been too risky. Like, even if they knocked her out, like, why would you then bring your victim to someone else's house that was like surrounded by other houses? Like, he couldn't have just like shot one of his guns in the middle of the night. He would have needed a suppressor. But I just think that would have been way too risky, because in Tylee, I strongly suspect she was murdered in her bed. I think that she was stabbed to death, and the prosecution believes that, according to the forensic anthropologist, that it was done with either a very large knife or a machete. But that would also account for the sharp marks on her, the bones in her pelvic area. I suspect that someone climbed on top of her and stabbed her. But yeah, so I think then I strongly suspect that they had the rogue in the garage, which the garage is open from the back of the apartment. So they wouldn't have really had to even worry that someone would notice a light was on in the garage. But I suspect they backed her Rogue into the garage, had the door closed, and then transported Tylee's body in the back seat, which would explain why her blood was on the seat. And then there was also blood on the floor of the back seat. So, yeah, so I don't, the detail about shooting a raccoon, I think the whole reason for that is, and I don't know how much to believe of anything that Garth said because he lied so much, but in my opinion, but apparently they had shot other raccoons, so I think that's why there was the reference to shooting a raccoon. I think it was to explain why there was recently dug dirt near the fire pit in the pet cemetery. But then Garth said they didn't bury raccoons in the pet cemetery. They buried them behind the silver shed. So anyway, so I think he just had to have some kind of explanation, not just for the dirt, but also for the smell. Because I mentioned that I had a confidential source tell me this was several years after Tylee's murder that they were on the property, and that area between like as soon as they got to the shed or the barn, that the smell was really bad, and this was several years later. So yeah, so I suspect he was worried about the smell and the dirt. And also where Tammy kept her ducks it wasn't very far from the pet cemetery. It was like maybe 50 to 100 yards away. And there were several very windy days during that time. So I did this whole analysis looking at like the wind direction and the wind propulsion of like different days in September, and it's somewhere on the post tab, what used to be called the community tab. But so that smell would have been really bad. I mean, it, by extension, if it was bad several years later, it would have had to have been bad at that time, in my opinion. So, yeah. But okay. Aunt Clara said, then I wonder, how did they fund everything? Was it Melanie Pulowski's money? All the airfare, Hawaii, and other stuff has to cost a lot. I think Chad funded all of that. What happens to credit card bills if you're arrested for murder and jailed for life? I think the credit card companies take the loss. Okay. I'm not going to try to pronounce this. Turdad. Do you think Maricopa County would have been happy burying this case, but couldn't because all the other high profile stuff that went down? Absolutely. Because in my opinion, they were so negligent. Like, there is no record of even like a trajectory analysis, because like and there was also no accounting for the fact that, I mean, Charles was shot twice. He had 2 gunshot wounds, and with a very high power pistol, there should have been blood spatter all over that room, and there was none. There was no blood spatter. Like, I got access to the pictures that were taken that day. They were very high resolution, so I could blow them up on a large iMac screen, and I went inch by inch through that room looking for blood, and there was only a little bit of blood chilling by a round, so a bullet, and that round didn't even look like it was spent. It didn't look like it was like it shot out of a gun. It was just chilling, maybe, I don't know, like 10 feet from Charles' shoulder. So one of the bullets exited his shoulder. It hit him in the chest, hit his, I think it hit his spine, went into the floor, ricocheted up, and came out of his shoulder. So that round that was like chilling in the middle of the floor, there should have at minimum been a blood trail between Charles' body and the round, and there wasn't. There's just like a little bit of blood around the actual round, and I'm going to see if I can find that picture really quickly, because it is absolutely bizarre. Like, there is no explaining that crime scene. And then I'll finish my thought, because I did a pretty deep analysis of this. Let me see if I can just find the picture of the floor. Yeah. Okay. So this could be triggering because you do see Charles' arm and his hand. That's all you see. But if you're triggered by that kind of thing, don't look. Okay, but I just dropped the picture in, and you can see where I like magnified it, because I'm trying to look for blood, and you could see how close it was to his body, but there was no blood between it and his shoulder. And a couple of guys who are familiar with bullets, like I had said in a live, this was like in Cool Cats, and I said, this round doesn't look spent. Like, I was looking up pictures of like spent rounds versus, you know, like rounds that haven't been spent, like haven't been shot out of a gun, like looked up the type of bullet that his gun used, and compared the images, and I was like, this doesn't even look like it was spent. And so a couple guys who said that they're, you know, familiar with this kind of thing, agreed that this bullet does not look like it was spent. So I don't know if they actually analyzed that, but this should have been setting off all kinds of alarm bells. The fact that there was so little blood. And then there was another issue. I'll drop this picture in. This is a picture of the floorboard. So they cut this piece of floorboard out, and this was on the side of the room where the sliding glass doors were. So I don't know directionally where that was now. At this point, it's been a few years since I've looked at this, but if you look at this, like, I strongly suspect that Alex missed the first time. So what I suspect happened is, and I wish I had a picture. I don't know if in this context, I mean, like this quickly, if I would be able to like pull up pictures from the shooting. You see Chandler. Yeah. But so I suspect that Charles walked into the room, like they lured him in. And I suspect that they told him JJ was out back because this baseboard and this, obvious spot where a bullet entered the baseboard. First of all, from the trajectory, like Alex would have had to have been standing like near the hall. And so I suspect that Lori told Charles that JJ was out back. Charles walked into the middle of the room and Alex shot at him and missed because this baseboard has no blood. Like, I zoomed way in on that picture. There isn't a hint of blood in front of it, or if you like really zoom in on that baseboard, there's no blood. So if this had been around that, like this would have been by the positioning, because this wasn't close to where Charles' body ended up. Let me see if because I have a really good picture that I made, where I like kind of lay out the room. I just wish I would have yeah, I don't remember what I called that file. Let me just see really quickly. Yeah, I need to gather those pictures. Actually, while I'm talking, I'm just going to kind of flip through these pictures. But so this baseboard wasn't anywhere near where Charles was shot the second time, which is where his body was. This was on the other side of the room. So if you're walking from the front door to the kitchen, it was like to the left, like it's along like where the backyard would be. And so I strongly suspect that this bullet was not accounted for in the police report, because somewhere in the police report, or maybe it was when Detective Moffat was interviewed by when he was interviewed for Dateline. Okay. No. Yeah, no, that's not the right one. Okay, I'm sorry. I probably just need to give up finding this picture. But anyway, so Detective Moffat had said there were 2 shots. Well, I've shared, like, there is audio in the 48 Hours episode. I've never found this audio, but they included audio where one of the officers at the scene said they shot the fuck out of him. And then there on the body cam video, one of the officers at the scene said there were 1, 2, 3, 4 shots, something like that. And so, yeah, so, like that's not 2 shots. So anyway, so all that to say, like, they actually said that when Alex drew he drew the room and like where he was standing and all that it matched the forensics. But I don't think that it does, because what about this bullet that's in the baseboard? So obviously, like, after Charles was shot, they cleaned up, and they cleaned up very thoroughly. Now, I suspect if they actually had gone in with luminol, that room would have lit up like the 4th of July, but there is no record of them luminol testing anything. There was even a reference in the police report to them finding blood by the aerator in the kitchen sink, and they took a picture of it but didn't submit it for testing. So I'm like, well, that's weird. Like, what's the point of just taking a picture? Like, oh, we just wanted to note that there was blood by the sink. We don't know whose blood that was. They also didn't do gunshot residue testing on anyone. And so, yeah, so there were just a number of things that they just don't line up. Okay. Not sure if yeah, so I think that they were just going to bury it. And I think they just thought, like, well, it just makes me wonder how often these police departments in Maricopa County just call it a day, So, but in the case of Charles' murder, I think the minute they realized that Charles was down for the second shot, they should have gone and picked up Alex. And then that week, they would have had probable cause to also arrest Lori, because there were so many contradictions in their claims. And clearly, Lori thought that she was the beneficiary of the life insurance policy, because Kay was in contact with her. But yeah, there was one reference in the police report where Detective Moffat said he drove by Alex's house. Like, and it's not even like they left town immediately after Charles was murdered. I mean, they hung around for almost 2 months. So, yeah, I strongly suspect they just thought, like, close enough. And then when all of this happened, I think they were still slow to press charges, because I'm sure, like, they handed just a mess to the prosecutor, who now has to prosecute this case. Like, I mean, Lori's defense attorneys are going to have a heyday with just the lack of investigation. But I think if any justice comes from that, it will be bonus. Okay. Is Chad going to get a new trial? I mean, he's by default granted an appeal, so because it's a capital case, I don't think he's going to get a new trial. I do suspect that the appellate attorneys for both Lori and Chad will continue to chip away at the, like, they'll pick up where John Pryor left off, trying to make Rob Wood a witness because of some of these concerns with his text messages with Melanie, the interview that he was a part of that wasn't recorded with Melanie and David, or they only recorded 20 minutes of it and stuff. So, but, and, in the off chance that they were able to, convince an appellate court of prosecutorial misconduct, perhaps they would be granted new trials. But I think that is a very highly improbable. Not highly improbable. didn't Alex embezzle money from Janice and Barry? Yeah, there is a report of that when Barry went to federal prison for tax evasion, he turned his house over to Alex. I don't know why he wouldn't have turned it over to Adam, but he turned it over to Alex. And then, as the story goes, Alex pulled like $100,000 from the equity, and this family loves to say spend it on hookers, but I don't have evidence of that. These are claims. Okay. How did Lori discuss her religious beliefs in your earlier visits with her? Well, for one, I knew next to nothing about the LDS religion at that point. So she talked about her faith. I mean, I did let her know, like, I thought it was interesting, but I had my own faith. I was kind of tiptoeing through the tulips when she was married to Joe because I didn't want to say anything to embarrass Joe. And I could tell Joe was uncomfortable with any talk about their religion because I think he was afraid that I would judge him because he had never been like a religious person. But I was just happy for him because he was happy. But yeah, so she would talk about different things. I don't remember a lot of the details because, it was just so long ago. Like the only things I really remember are things that like just were significant that stood out to me. But I had I don't know, like I had no framework for the LDS faith, so I just don't think I would have really absorbed a whole lot. And like I said, Joe would kind of reroute the conversation just so that like it wasn't putting me on the spot. So yeah, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I just don't remember details. I just remember, like, I remember one time her telling me that, like, I had agreed to everything that would happen in my life. I guess they call that, like, the premortal life or world or something like that. But she didn't use that term. She just told me, you actually agreed to everything that would happen because you, like, God showed you what it would take for you to cry out to him. And that part, no disrespect to people who believe that, I just wholesale rejected that, just because I can't see that, like, God showing someone, oh yeah, you're going to go into foster care. All these horrible things are going to happen to you, but it's all going to turn out. So, right, you want to sign on the dotted line. So that was actually pretty offensive to me. Because it was also in the context of, like, I believe she had been talking about Joe's abuse of Tylee, and she knew that I grew up in an abusive home, and so she just kind of, like, I think that was the context, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that was one detail that I wasn't down with that at all. Okay. It was mentioned that Alex was a truck driver. Do you think it is possible that he could have been a highway truck murderer, SA guy? It is said that there are many of them. No, I mean, anything is possible, but I don't think that he was like a serial killer who, like, there was that one high profile case of a guy who he had a route along the eastern seaboard, and he would just go up to homes along that route, and if the door was open, he would go in and, RAPE women and murder them. But I just kind of, I don't know. The only thing we have evidence of is his role in these murders. And even that evidence is flimsy. Like, we know his phone was at these different locations. And I do believe that, I do believe that he had hesitancy about it, because there was a text exchange between him and Lori right after they moved to Rexburg, and Alex texted Lori and asked, no, yeah, yeah, Alex texted Lori, asked what she was doing, and she said something about identifying zombies, and he replied, "No more Z's." And this was before the kids were murdered. But and also when Zulema had an exchange with Alex where Alex talked about Tylee being, I think he called her a dark portal, that they had traveled with this dark portal. And I don't even know what he was complaining about, because Tylee had to drive by herself in her Jeep. So we know that because she called a friend on that trip and said she didn't want to be alone. But yeah, so, but Zulema told Alex, like, you will be okay, here it is. Zulema asked Alex in a text, "How was the trip?" Now, keep in mind, he had just shared his phone number with her like a month before. Alex said, "Pretty good considering the dark portal we brought with us." Zulema replied with a question mark. Alex replied, "Tylee." And then Alex replied again, "Can you call a tornado for a single person?" Zulema replied, "Tornado? Maybe an inner tornado." Alex said, "Inner is good." Zulema said, "I think you guys will be led to deal with the dark one when it is time." And then Alex said, "Agreed," and then replied, "Es cierto," Spanish translation, "It's true." So he translated his text for a native Spanish speaker. Like, that's his level of intelligence. But, and then the next day, Lori and Alex had this exchange, and Lori said she was working on Z's, and he replies, "No more Z's." So, and let's see, Lori replied, "We are trying to get to the bottom of what we need to do to eliminate them completely. I'm sure you will be told also," and a heart. Alex then stated, "I am going to get lunch and probably go to the range to sight in my rifles." So, really dark stuff, but there seems to be a little bit of a push me pull you thing where, on the one hand, I don't know why else he would have moved to Rexburg except to at least assist in the murders of the kids and Tammy. And yet there also seems to be some hesitancy. So, I try not to give him too much credit, but I think he mostly just felt a debt to Lori. Now, one of Lori's friends I talked with at one point did say that Lori told her that Alex had sexually abused her. So, and then also said one day when she was over swimming, excuse me, that they were getting they were getting into their bathing suits and Alex was outside the window. So it just sounds like there were problems with Alex even before this supposed head injury. But okay. Do you think Lori and Chad wanted Alex to off Zulema in Las Vegas, the tarped black massage incident, and then off him once he returned? Two birds, one stone? No, I think that Zulema's story about the tarp was complete bullshit. Like, I just don't think that that ever happened. One thing I've seen with these friends, co-conspirators, allegedly, is, excuse me, that they tried to reposition themselves as victims themselves who barely escaped death. Melanie Gibb did the same thing when in one of her interviews, she talked about how like she lived around the corner from murderers, and the people who lived around the corner from her were Alex and Zulema. So I thought it was interesting that she basically called Zulema a murderer too, which something that Melanie and I actually agree on. But yeah, so I think that whole story is ridiculous because one, like, I mean, just the whole tarp detail. First of all, like in the interview where she shared this story, her attorney, like they were making small talk before the interview started, and her attorney was talking about how they were doing renovations on their home, and the back wall of their home, or at least a portion of it, was gone. And so they had to put up tarp, like just to protect themselves from the elements. And so I think that Zulema heard that and was like, oh, tarp, I think I can use that. If you search the A Murderous Heart YouTube, I shared a video, like I just pulled out that section of the interview. But so I think that's where she got the tarp idea, but it just doesn't even make sense. Like, you know, supposedly, you know that this guy has been involved in some bad stuff. Like, you actually told him you guys will be led in how to deal with the dark one, you know, and yet you're on your honeymoon and okay, strike one, he pulls out a tarp. Like, that is so ridiculous. Like, no one would get on a tarp, especially with, first of all, that's not sexy. That's not honeymoon material. Like, oh, here, I want to give you a massage. Instead of being on like the soft bed, I'm just going to throw this plastic-ish tarp and you lie down on that for this, you know, massage. I mean, it just makes absolutely no sense. So yeah, I don't think that I think she may have genuinely been concerned for her own welfare, you know, when Alex moved in with her. Her daughter moved out, I believe, when I think there was a reference to like when Alex moved in, her daughter Kara, who had been interviewed, said something about how she moved out because she didn't want to live with, like, I think she said something like her mom kept bringing all these men home and she didn't want any part of that. But so I think, you know, she may have legitimately been afraid for her life, but I don't think the tarp incident was an incident. Okay, Pam Keith asked when I heard about Charles' death, when this case went public. I mean, it was just so shocking to find out the kids were missing and Charles was dead and Lori was in the wind. I mean, it was, you know, I just thought back to that last visit and it was like, everyone's gone. You know, it was just absolutely bizarre. Um, okay. Why do you think Lori flew under the name Ryan? She had to have an ID under that name. Yeah, so even though Chandler police never came after her, I think that they were still worried that they were working the investigation and, you know, and would come after her. I think she was also worried about Charles tracking her. So I'm trying to, I don't think she started using her Ryan ID until after Charles was murdered. Um, let me see if I can verify that. Um, yeah, so she traveled to Idaho August 20th to the 25th. So this was like about 6 weeks after Charles was murdered. And she used her Lori Ryan ID. So her driver's license from Hawaii hadn't expired yet. And that had the name Lori Ryan. But now that I think about it, that's pretty strange. Because when she lived in Hawaii, she was married to Charles. So I don't know why she would have had a Hawaii ID with the name Brian. Yeah, that's very weird. But anyway, and then again in October, she flew from Hawaii to Mesa using the Lori Ryan name. I think she just didn't want people to know where she was. So I think she thought she was pretty criminally savvy. Iris asked, does anyone know if Zulema is a U.S. citizen? Was it possible that part of her agreement with the prosecuting office was to tell the truth could have included no deportation? As far as I know, she's a citizen. I think she still had family in Colombia, but yeah, yeah, yeah. I think she was most likely a citizen. Well, yeah, I think she would have had to have been because her social security number was left unredacted in the FOIA docs. Uh, okay, Grandma Gizzard. Hey, lady. Um, uh, I don't know that I want to answer this. Okay, how has the psychic investigator aspect of these cases affected how you've had to process and deal with parasocial issues? So, I, in following true crime as closely as I did, there were a couple cases where psychics actually were consulted and provided, or at least reportedly provided information that proved to be helpful. So I don't completely dismiss it, but I think in this case, the psychics were completely out of control. And I think anyone's claim that they found the kids, any of the psychics, were, in my opinion, completely unfounded. Because as I was going through the first FOIA document dump out of Chandler, let me see if I can find this, because I'll share this PDF. But anytime I found a reference to psychics, I would group those images together. Same with like each of the people around the case, so any references to Zulema went in a Zulema folder, and then, and even like all of the victims, and the family members. So basically, anytime I found a reference to a person, or in this case, like psychics, I put all of those screenshots in one folder, and then I created a PDF out of that folder. And I'm going to share that folder for just not the folder, I'm sorry, the PDF that I created, just for sheer entertainment value. Because any of these psychics who said they found the kids, like, there's a record of all of their claims, and there were quite a few that, like, who reached out to law enforcement. And I'm not making fun of that, but some of the ones who claimed that they found the kids, it was just like, oh yeah, well, what about, like, I'm just going to read this one reference. Not sure who this psychic came from. I think this was, well, let me see. Yeah, there were quite just a second. Let me finish that thought. There were quite a few references to a boulder. Like, I'll just read this one paragraph. And they are directing my attention to there for reasons unknown to me. If you flew wait, let me see if I can back up a little bit. Okay. It says, new picture, and new picture is in all caps. Okay, I am getting the feeling of running around. It is a lake, a very beautiful lake. It does look like the Pacific Northwest with the big giant trees, I feel like, but I don't see. I feel like there is a cabin behind me. There were lots of references to cabins. But let's see here. Yeah, I feel like there is a cabin behind me. The sound of children's laughter there, of being a very young girl and playing there. I am not saying it is her. I am not saying this is her. I am not saying or claiming this is this girl that is missing. So it's like, well, why are you sending this to law enforcement then? I don't want to do that. I just want to keep giving what I am getting, and then we will see what happens, because I usually do not do this without a sitter to confirm things, but I don't have one, so I am just going to do it anyway. It goes on and on. So I'll skip over some of the details. So from where I am on this property, where it feels like there would be a summer house there, or like a smaller house, it could even be a decent home, but it is the type of place where people have second homes, where they take their kids for the summer and stuff. It has that kind of feeling. Like, that is not the Daybell property. I am not saying that is what it is. I am saying that is the feeling. That is the vibe of the place. It is very peaceful, and repeats, very peaceful. But where I am directed, if you look straight across from there down to where there might be an opening that either feeds the river, or where the river goes away in the river, or where the river kind of goes away, I kind of get the feeling that it feeds the river there like a bottleneck. It looks like the lake is round, and then it looks like a bottleneck, like if you drew the lake, but I feel like it is leading into the lake like a water stream, like from the mountains where the snow melts and stuff. But I don't know for sure, but I feel like that. And they are directing my attention to there for reasons unknown to me. If you flew a helicopter over there, like, she gives no direction. Like, where are they supposed to fly this helicopter? And then went about 20 feet up the river, upriver. I am feeling like saying, and I don't want to be too cocky about saying 20 feet, because it could be like 75 feet or something. So I don't want my brain to start racing. I have to slow down, whatever is happening here. So, you will find a body there. I am seeing a boulder right around there. And if you went just past the boulder, and if you go in, I feel like there is woods and that are relatively close to the water. Oh, because it depends on how high the river is. Also, be aware regarding the boulder underwater if river is very high. Okay, because I was seeing the big trees. I mean, it just goes on and on talking about boulders, cabins, rushing river. I mean, there were multiple references throughout these like psychic claims to like a rushing river and the bodies being by this boulder. Like none of that panned out. So yeah, so I just think in this particular case, like I think I like during this case I came to not despise psychics, but like just south of despise because it felt so predatory. It was like psychics like reaching out and offering to do readings, and like if you think you know something, don't reach out to family members, reach out to law enforcement, you know, like but there were just so many just tricks and like even in Cool Cats, like I just felt like Donna Serafina, or the woman who goes by Donna Serafina, like she was always very nice to me, but it felt like she just had so many sock puppets in Cool Cats, because these people, these accounts would be like Donna Serafina, rah rah rah, and then their accounts would be quite obviously fake. I mean, over time, it got to be like there were some that sometimes accounts were kind of on the edge. Like if an account was really locked down, and then we would offer those people an opportunity to do a video call or something like that. But some of them had characteristics from account to account that just would not be in a genuine account, and a lot of these accounts that were really pimping Donna Serafina and like claiming that she found the kids, you know, like, I mean, no disrespect to Donna Serafina, but she didn't find the kids. Like there was, as far as I know, there were no predictions that like, you know, like I see a dirty shed on Chad's property, or you know, whatever. It was always like these, you know, kind of almost like picturesque scenarios, and I think that they were operating under the same assumption that a lot of us were, which is the kids were in Yellowstone Park. And so I think that's part of the reason there were so many claims about mountains and rivers and, you know, snow melting off the mountains and boulders, and you know, like if they had been in Yellowstone Park, that would have been a little safer of an assumption, but they were on Chad's property. So and I haven't read anything in any of Donna's predictions that indicated that would have indicated like where the kids were actually found. So again, no disrespect to Donna Serafina or any psychics, but it got so out of control that we just delete any claims about Donna Serafina finding the kids. And also, you know, in this particular case, it just seemed like almost all of the psychic references were in reference to Donna Serafina. So I don't know if it was just her being extraordinarily aggressive and self-promotional or what, but she does have some recordings. I've heard someone told me that she talked about having recordings with one of the family members, um, and I am very, very curious about that. I think that could be potentially enlightening, but not the predictions. Uh, okay. Friday Tie Day asks, was Zulema older than Alex? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think she's like in her 60s. Her date of birth was in the FOIA docs, so I could look it up, but I'm not sure. If she was, it probably wasn't by that much. But she was quite a bit older than Lori, so it is very strange that she let Lori call her baby girl. I don't know if Zulema referred to her as mom, like the rest of them. I kind of assume she did because there was a text message, I believe, from Melanie Pulowski to Zulema where she just referred to Lori as mom. I think she said, like, what did mom say or something like that. So typically you wouldn't say that to someone who, like, who's not also a child of that person. So, like, usually if you're talking to someone who's not a family member, you would say my mom, but so that did make me think that Zulema probably called Lori mom too, but Zulema was quite a bit older than Lori. Okay. Marion circled back asking if did Brandon refer to the cause of the bloodstain of his daughter in that rogue? To my knowledge, Brandon has never talked about the bloodstain in the rogue. So yeah, I don't know if we'll find out more at the trial for Charles or the trial for Brandon, but yeah, I am very curious about how his daughter's blood got in that car. I mean, it could have been a nosebleed or something, but Lori bought the Rogue right before she moved. So, well, not right before. It was August 8th. So, in between the time Charles was shot and she moved to Idaho. So she didn't have it that long, but she did have it for almost a month. So before she moved. So I'm assuming that was probably when his daughter was in the Rogue. I mean, if something terrible had happened, I imagine she would have told her dad. But yeah, it is weird that, like, Lori, who seemed to be a pretty tidy person, would just, like, keep this giant blood stain. So I've also wondered if she traded in the Infinity for a Rogue because there was evidence in the Infinity. I don't know, but it could have just been that she couldn't afford the payment on the Infinity and she traded it in. Okay, Jean asked, do you think Charles knew Lori and Alex were going to attack Joe? Did Charles pay for an expensive lawyer to get Alex off of attempted murder charges and reduced to a much, I think she meant lesser charge? The second half I have no idea. But the first one, I really don't know. I do strongly suspect at some point. I don't know if he knew ahead of time, because like the judging by when Phoenix police said that Joe died, he was most likely, and I'm just going to say was murdered because I believe he was murdered. He was most likely murdered while Charles was in Louisiana for his mom's death. So his mom died around that same time. So so I don't know what he would have known beforehand. This same confidential source who told me about the insurance said that all they knew was that Charles and Lori were in like dire straits financially when Charles reached out to them to help get this insurance payout. First of all, it is a curious thing, and this person brought it up to me. They said it is very rare for insurance policies to take that long to pay out. So there may have been a concern about like Joe's cause of death, or they might have been doing, like they might have hired their own private investigator or something. But they said it's very, very rare for it to take that long. But this person had a contact at that insurance company. But they had also said when I talked to this person that they were in dire straits financially, and then they got the insurance money, and then Charles wasn't working as much. And so yeah, so I just don't know. But at some point I do believe that he knew that Joe was murdered. I believe everyone who was living in the house at that time knew Joe was murdered. So that would include Zach Cox, Colby, Kelsey, Tylee, because Lori has no filter. She has no internal editor, and she clearly gets very manic. I mean, just judging by the fact that she would fly to Hawaii, which is a solid Cox tradition when something sketch goes down, but that she would brag to people that she paid her brother to murder her ex-husband. Like, why wouldn't she be telling those close to her? She clearly felt invincible. And so, yeah, so I do think that Charles knew Joe was murdered. And then, one time I was going through the body cam recording from January. So it was the body cam footage that came from Gilbert Police, where they were interviewing Charles. And I had listened to this body cam video before, but I caught where he said that Lori told him, "I'm going to kill you too." And then he just like quickly moved on from that. So he didn't belabor that point, and the officers who were talking to him, they didn't stop him and say, "Wait, two? Who else did she kill?" But when I heard that, like, if I had any doubt about if Charles knew, which I didn't, just because what I know of Lori's MO. But in my mind, that doubt was removed. And for him to like move on from that point, it indicated to me that he didn't feel comfortable telling the police about that. And so I suspect she had something on him. I'm not saying he was part of the plan or played any role in the murder, but I suspect she controlled him by something she had on him, because I also suspect that was the reason that he withdrew the divorce petition, because, you know, there was this whole claim about Charles writing an email and saying love always wins, and he just wanted the marriage to work out. That email, it was never passed on to law enforcement. It's not in the FOIA docs, and there would have been no reason for either of these police departments to redact it because it had been shared publicly. And so that means it wasn't ever passed on to law enforcement, or it most certainly would have been, as far as I could tell, it would have been in the police report. But so I don't think that this was a case of love always wins, because when he withdrew the decree or the petition, that same day he pulled JJ out of his school, like not for the day, like he pulled him out of school and moved to Houston. So that's just not the behavior of someone who just believes love always wins and they're going to work through this. He was also in managing multiple, I think it was like 14 different conversations with 14 different women on GChat alone. So that doesn't include like any dating apps he was on. Like that was just over Google Chat. I think it was 14. And some he was sending money to. So I think he had very much moved on. And I don't say that in judgment of him. I'm just saying, like, okay, in trying to, you know, see like where his head was at the time, I don't think that he withheld this information or even withdrew the petition because he was just like hopelessly in love. I think she controlled him somehow. But okay, I'll answer one more question and then we'll call it a night. Let's see. Okay, Illuminating Ink asked, did your brother ever give his side of the story why his marriage to Lori ended? What was your understanding? So Joe and I were estranged when he and Lori divorced. And so I wouldn't have known his side. Okay, that's kind of a bummer note to end on. I'll do one more question. Okay, Great Laker asks, how did Lori live so far beyond her means? I know Charles was a successful businessman, but I'm thinking there had to be a lot of debt. Am I right? So my last trip to Phoenix, she had told me that it looked like they made more money than they did. She said that the big houses were important to Charles, like they weren't important to her. I don't know that I believe that, but it was an interesting insight because she said, we'll get like really far behind on bills and then he'll have a big payment come through and then we catch up on everything. And she described it as like cyclical. Like this would just always happen. Like they would get behind on bills. They would, you know, start to panic. Then he would get a big payment and they would pay everything off. Yeah, so I think they lived with a pretty high debt load. So yeah, like even like when I think back to that vacation, and I've talked about this before, but I thought like they had to be insanely wealthy for them to plan a trip and fly so many people to Florida on such short notice. And I don't remember how short of notice it was, but I remember thinking like these tickets had to be outrageously expensive. And then they, you know, got each of us our own, I think they were like villas, you know, and we were all in the same, you know, it was, they were like more like condos than than like hotel. It definitely wasn't a hotel. It was like we each kind of had our own condo. And they paid for everything. And I thought, how in the world could they afford this? And I would be telling my kids to like, like get something cheap on the menu. And and Lori would overhear me, and she or Charles would be like, don't listen to your mom, or order what you want, and stuff. So it was really like spare no expense. Uh, we did like an evening, I don't know, boat ride out to this island with this like all you can eat dinner, and Adam's wife, Nicole, and Kay were there for that. I didn't see them the rest of the trip that I remember. But it was, it was just Lori, Charles, Adam, and I. Like we were the adults managing all the kids. But anyway, so but yeah, I mean, that had to be expensive, and it was just a really, really expensive trip for them. But then I found out at that time, the state of Texas required Joe to carry, it was more than $300,000 of life insurance, which hopefully they've revised that law, because I can understand wanting a parent to have a life insurance policy that will provide for their child if anything happened to them, but requiring a 300 plus thousand, I think it was like 340,000 or 360,000, something like that, policy, like, if someone is in like a dangerous situation like this, you're giving people 340 or 300 plus thousand reasons to kill the person. So so I do suspect, as much as like I got along great with Charles, he was very kind to me, he was very kind to my kids, it does appear that like that was an investment, that whole trip, the whole purpose of that trip was to buy everyone's silence. And I think they thought like, okay, well, yeah, we'll put this all on Amex, but then we'll get this life insurance money, and then we'll pay it all off, and it will be worth it because we won't have to worry about Annie calling the police. But at that point, like, I was already estranged from Joe. But yeah, so but like I said, Joe was assaulted the following week. So I think it would be really difficult, as much as I don't want to dishonor the deceased. I still, like, I'm not going to allow that to, for better or for worse, shade the story as I can see it from, the pieces of the puzzle that we have. It does appear that Charles would have known something, and for Lori to, or someone to tell both Adam and Colby, because they both talked about the plan to tase Joe and stick him in the trunk. Colby caught himself in his Netflix interview, but Adam was all in. He went into all the details. Colby caught himself at like trunk, and then was like, who knows? And I'm like, I think but anyway, so yeah, I don't know, but we may find out more at the trial for Charles, and then even the trial for Brandon, because I was really surprised by how much information there was about the investigations into the missing kids and Tammy's death. There was in that Gilbert police report. So at this point, I think, like all of there's just so much overlap between these cases. But then also sometimes, a small detail can really shine a light on something. Like like they probably didn't think about when they published these FOIA docs, like the fact that there was a legend with all of this like GPS data, and and they had like all of the initials you would suspect, like CD, LV, MB, because Melanie was Boudreaux at that time, and well, at the time she visited Idaho, and so on and so forth. And they all had colors that kind of went with who they were. Like Melanie was pink, Lori was red, and then there was this SS, which was yellow, and so like that was a question mark. Like, was Summer Shiflett in Idaho? Because there's another reference to a yellow pin. It wasn't right by the screenshot with the legend, but there was a reference elsewhere to a yellow pin at Alex's apartment. So, there was also Serena Sharp, but she had been long gone. Like, she was out of the group by that point. So I don't think that Serena was in Idaho. But then, so my point being, like, there could be details where it's like, where I just read it and I'm like, wait, SS? Who's SS? And or like the detail of Charles saying, that Lori said, I'm going to kill you too. Like, that was one word completely changed the context of what he was saying. So all that to say, like after the trial for Charles and then the trial for Brandon, I imagine there will also be additional FOIA docs released. So, that's part of the reason I'm doing these Q&As is, one, I know this case reasonably well, so I don't have to prepare for this. Sometimes, I just have to stop and look something up, but that's really more just so you're not taking my word for it. But yeah, so at least at this point, the plan is to keep these going until I get more FOIA docs, and I suspect there will be more information pulled from the FOIA docs, because there are details that are kind of like curiosities at this point from the other FOIA docs. But then sometimes I'll read something and I'll be like, wait a minute, where did I read something about this? And I'll do a search and stuff. And that's part of the reason it takes me so incredibly long to get through the FOIA docs, because I'm like cross-referencing and pulling screenshots and pulling together, posts. Like when I was more active in Cool Cats, I'd pull together a post, and now I put them out on the community board. But anyway, so so I suspect we'll be getting a lot more information. I've said this before, I'm more interested in the FOIA docs than the trials. The trials are interesting, but these witnesses, at this point, they've had so much time to get their revisionist stories down. What's interesting is what they wrote in text messages and emails before this was a worldwide case, or a case with worldwide attention. That's really what's very interesting to me. So anyway, okay. All right. That's enough for tonight. I didn't even eat dinner yet, so I'm going to go do that. But yeah, it was nice getting to hang out with you again, and I will see you again in 2 weeks. Good night.